In lesson 4.7, we're going to talk about flowchart proofs. And in flowchart proofs, we use diagrams to help us understand how to go from one step to the next. So in this triangle set, here you see on the screen, if I were to tell you that the two triangles, in the two triangles above, that side AD was congruent to side AB, marked in the red, and I were to tell you that BC was congruent to DC, marked in the blue, could you show me that angle D was congruent to angle B? And so the big idea here is that I notice that they share a side AC, and so I should be able to figure out that these two triangles are congruent by side, side, side. And after you show the two triangles are congruent by side, 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 that means I would know that, of course, angle B and angle D are congruent because they are the corresponding parts in two congruent triangles. How do we visually show this? This is what's called flowchart proofs or flowchart thinking. So in our next diagram here, we have these same pictures that we had before. We have the AB is congruent to AD. They tell us that in the given information. So I write that down in a box. The first line in the box you'll notice is the statement that the two sides are congruent. And beneath that in the box is the reason that they are congruent, which is that the information was given. Also, the second statement they told me was that the BC side and the DC side were congruent, and that was also given information. And so I make another box, and I notice that the first line is the statement of what's going on. BC is congruent to DC. And the second line is the reasoning for that statement, which was that it was given information. Now, the big idea is whenever you have two triangles, is that you're going to try and show that they are indeed congruent. So I'm going to say that side AC is congruent to side AC. We see that down here in the third box, and the reason is something called the reflexive property. You could also, if you wanted to, have said that they are the same segment. Either one would be fine. When I grew up as a kid in geometry, we talked about that it was the reflexive property, but you can say it's the same segment. And the reason we're doing this is now these three boxes, the red box, the blue box, and the orange box, show me that I have indeed shown that these two triangles are congruent by the side, side, side postulate. Once I know that to be true, I say that. You'll see all these arrows coming from these three statements of each side set being congruent, and in the next box they all lead to the statement that the two triangles are congruent and they're matched up appropriately, and my reasoning is the side, side, side postulate. Remembering that our ultimate goal was to say that the other angles were going to be congruent, in other words, angle B was going to be congruent to angle D, my statement in the purple box of the two triangles being congruent leads me to the conclusion that the two angles that I wanted to show were congruent are indeed congruent in the pink box, and the reasoning is that they are the corresponding parts of congruent triangles, and so they're congruent. And so in this flowchart proof, and in all flowchart proofs for the most part in triangles, there'll be three steps. The first step will be to write down three boxes showing three pieces of a triangle that prove that the two triangles are congruent. The second step in the purple box will be to say that the two triangles are congruent and the reasoning behind it. And then the third step will be to get to your goal of what you want to show is congruent by knowing that those two things that you want to show are congruent by the corresponding parts of congruent triangles, our congruent theorem. And so that's kind of the main flow of proofs or the basic proofs in geometry. Oftentimes we're talking about two triangles being congruent and drawing a conclusion from that.